Remind. Remind Remind is an app that is usually approved by a school district where students and teachers can communicate, and also parents can communicate with teachers. And basically, you have unlimited access to a teacher. Um, if you have heard of GroupMe, it works the same way. Um, that would also be classified as an out of class communication tool. You could also use email as an outside communication tool, and you could also use actually a phone call if you really wanted to give your phone number out to students. Um, but if students have the ability to reach you through Mind over whatever the lessons are, or if they have an issue, or if they're having some sort of crisis, they can reach out to their teacher, and they're going to feel closer to their teacher. Basically, like we talked about earlier, the transactional distance. It'll make the Remind and the GroupMe and the email and the phone calls will make the students feel like they're closer to their teacher. Um, Basically, one thing that teachers wanted in a remote virtual setting was consistency. They have found that when there's consistency in a remote virtual setting, um, they're more likely to log on and do the things they're supposed to. Um, there's an expectation there between both the teachers and students, that of basically what to expect whenever they're in this type of setting. Um, One interesting thing that in my research was that teachers really wanted the ability to meet their students in person for activities. So although the lessons were online and they were inside a virtual setting like Zoom or Google Meet, they all really wanted to meet their students outside in real life and in person. Some teachers had mentioned things like field trips. They mentioned things like get to know your teacher, or a parent night, or just anything where they could access and actually have that feeling and sense of belonging um, with their teacher and students. So the summary of the findings, this was a qualitative case study, and it was used to gain an in-depth perspective of teachers. Um, the researcher gained an understanding of teacher perceptions and what influences relationships. The communication is like whenever those Remind impacted the relationships, emails impacted the relationships. One big thing whenever teachers and students met in a virtual setting that helped the relationship was before class time started. It could be as simple as a teacher asking a student about what they're wearing. Maybe they noticed a band that was on a t-shirt, or maybe they noticed something in the background that they could talk to them about. Some teachers said that students would start logging on early when they're in the virtual setting. That way they could just chat with their teacher, and that helped build a relationship between the students and teachers. Teacher-student relationships are complex, but they're really essential in a remote environment, because you really like students always want to please their teachers. So do the findings agree or disagree with the literature? Um, the findings that I found really did agree with the literature. Teacher-student relationships are essential to the educational process, and they're really necessary for remote learning to be successful. To better understand the teacher-student relationships, research needs to really be conducted nationally or internationally. And there needs to be like multiple research sites with a larger sample. That way we can see exactly how these teacher-student relationships are affected. I would also mention that we should probably um, put a quantitative component in this. Um, qualitative is okay because you can see what the patterns or the themes were. But if there was a quantitative component behind this, we could really get an in-depth look of how these teacher-student relationships are impacted. So the recommendations based on findings, like I said, it needs to be conducted. The research needs to be conducted at various geographic locations. Basically, that's going to allow for generalizability. Um, the quantitative component will probably, that's going to increase, like I said, it's going to increase the validity of the study. Actually, another huge thing that could happen is you could get the perceptions of the students. Instead of the perception of the teachers, you get the perception of the students to see how the students feel, what the students are thinking. Um, there is, you obviously have to get permission to see how the students are feeling from a school district, which is probably going to be pretty difficult um, to get the permission to do that. But if you could talk to students about the teachers and teachers about the students in one study, that's really going to uh, help future research. Basically, the conclusion is teacher-student relationships impact every facet of a child's education. Um, Teacher-student relationships can have an everlasting impact on a student. Basically, I remember I formed relationships with my teachers when I was in school, and I still remember the teachers to this day who I formed a relationship with who helped me get to where I'm at today. I also remember the teachers who I did not form a relationship with and who said very unkind things to me. And you can really impact a student's life either way. Um, but if if you have a relationship, you're more likely to talk to this student in the future. Teacher-student relationships in a traditional and a virtual setting are comparable, but obviously they're not the same um, due to communication, due to technology, due to time restraints and personalities. So time restraints really impact whether teachers and students can form a relationship, because if you are basically in, let's say, a high school setting and you only have an hour for class, or if you're in a college setting, you only have an hour for class, there's not really much time to do anything or talk to anyone, because basically you're going to be focused more on the material that is being presented. Teacher's going to be more focused on teaching. So like I said, there's really not a lot of time to form a relationship unless you're meeting before or after class, because in between there's not really much that you can do. Personalities also play a major impact in whether teacher and student relationships are formed, um, because everyone has a different personality. You might have someone that's really outgoing. You have a student that's really outgoing and wants to talk and wants to be involved. You also might have a student who is very shy and maybe laid back, doesn't want anybody to talk to them, doesn't want the teacher to talk to them, doesn't want them to call on them. So this kind of complicates the teacher-student relationship in the remote setting, as well as in a traditional setting, because everyone has a different personality and things are going to happen, and you don't know whether a relationship is going to be formed between the teachers and the students. So academic performance, attitudes, behavior, communication, mental health, job performance, social skills are all impacted by the teacher-student relationship. Um, if you have one of those students who do not want to talk and who does not want to be involved, most likely their academic performance is not, they're not going to do very well in school. If they have the attitude that they're not going to do anything, they're probably also not going to do well. If they have the attitude that they can do anything that they want to do and anything they put their mind to, whether it is in a traditional setting or in a virtual setting, they're more likely they're going to succeed. Um, There were not a lot of behavior issues in the remote virtual setting, which also helped with building a teacher-student relationship. The job performance by teachers were impacted. One thing that we should really think about in job performance is whether the teacher was able to work from home or if they had to drive to school and sit in an empty room, because that might change what the results might be. So I know some teachers, they were able to work from home. And like I said earlier, I had to drive, I work about 45 minutes away, and I had to drive to work whenever I was teaching in a remote virtual setting. And I drove to school alone. I sat in a room alone all day by myself. And it just really led to depression. Possibly if I were to be a virtual teacher at home, I might not have had those feelings or the sentiments about virtual learning. So that's something to look at if there is any future research conducted. Um, social skills might be impacted depending on, like I said, the personality. Um, Basically, technology and out-of-class communication tools make it easier for teachers and students to bond with one another. So the things like GroupMe or Remind or email, or if people are just meeting just to talk on Zoom one-on-one, it's going to make it easier to have some bonding going on there, and they'll really be able to connect with each other. Social media can also play a role in this and have um, teachers and students connect to each other. Things like a Facebook group could be used, or some other like a Facebook group or Twitter or something where all of the students and teachers can be involved with one another and they can tell each other what's going on, even if it's not related to education. It's evident that relationships matter in the lives of teachers and students, and they make a difference in the outcomes of education. Um, so every relationship that you can think of that you ever had in education it's going to really impact someone somewhere. And maybe if you're a teacher, you have inspired a student to do something. You can inspire a student to do something, whether it is in a traditional room or a traditional setting or in a virtual setting. And you can also form relationships if it's in a traditional setting or in a remote setting. It really doesn't matter. But teacher-student relationships do differ. They really do differ in a virtual setting from a traditional setting. And there is probably going to be more research done in the future about this, but it's really evident that teacher-student relationships do matter. So are there any questions?
Yes,
Explained very well. Does anyone have any question?
Yes, hello.
Hey.
Yep, go ahead, please.
Yes, please. It's a fantastic presentation. I've appreciated it so much. And indeed, it's quite a very important aspect to look at in a world where we began to interact virtually most of the time, especially interaction between teachers and learners. It's quite true, actually, when he says that pupils get motivated when you first begin by maybe talking to them about maybe something else just before the lesson. They do get motivated, and I've done that before, and I've realized that it has some quite good motivational boost for them to participate very well during the lesson, and it even encourages them to actually attend the lesson at the next time. So maybe just drawing onto one aspect that you mentioned about quantitative aspects which can be added to your study to make it more robust and deep. I don't know, maybe just a question, which aspect would you think can be we can add the quantitative component just to enhance the study. Thank you.